Continuing on my 12-part rookie profile series for 2022, we are now moving on to my 5th ranked rookie in this class, my 1.05 in one quarterback leagues, and probably my 107 to 1.08 in superflex leagues. Also my RB3 in this class, Isaiah Spiller, running back out of Texas A&M. And Spiller, in my opinion, is the third and final running back in this class, worthy of a top half first round pick, if not even a top 10 rookie pick overall. This is a very similar class to what we had last year in terms of we had the top 3 running backs, Najee, Etienne, and Javonte, then a whole bunch of wide receivers and Kyle Pitts making up the first round. Unless you were one of those unfortunate people to reach on Trey Sermon in the first round or even really grab Michael Carter, I think this class is very similar to what we had last year in terms of the breakdown and proportion of running backs to wide receivers in this class. Regardless, Spiller is a tier break at the running back position for me, and while he was more productive in his career than Kenneth Walker, I still have Spiller as my RB3, and we'll get into all of that and the why very soon. So starting with Spiller's college career, he came into Texas A&M as a top 10 running back recruit in the nation in 2019 as a super young 18-year-old and only 3 weeks at the start of the season. In his freshman year, he led A&M in rushing as their solidified RB1 with 174 carries, 946 yards, and 10 rushing touchdowns, while also adding 29 receptions for 203 yards receiving. He was A&M starting running back with the next highest running back in carries that year, only getting 35 carries compared to Spiller's 174, which we love to see that early control of the offense. Spiller then followed up that with a great sophomore season, carrying the ball 188 times for 1,036 yards and 9 rushing touchdowns, while also adding 20 receptions for 193 yards receiving. Now on the surface, this might not look like an improvement from 2019, but A&M did play 3 fewer games due to COVID in 2020, so Spiller was actually averaging over 5 carries more per game in 2020, and his 13-game pace would have been 245 carries for 1,350 yards and 12 touchdowns, which is a significant bump up from his freshman year. Spiller then finished his collegiate career with a 2021 junior year stat line of 179 carries for 1,011 yards and 6 touchdowns, while also adding 25 receptions for 189 yards and a touchdown through the air. It was another good showing for Spiller's final season, but it was a drop in production from what he saw in his sophomore year, mainly because of Devon Achane, who was the 4th rated running back in the 2020 freshman class in the nation, and who is also arguably the fastest player in NCAA football, so it makes sense that he would steal some work from Isaiah Spiller. Moving into the analytics then, let me remind you of my 8-marker system for running backs, which is just a series of check boxes that I want my players to hit, which include checks for athleticism and measurables, production, and most importantly, draft capital. Breece Hall is going to be a 7 out of 8 marker player when he gets drafted in the 1st or 2nd round, the only running back in this class to do that. Walker will also finish at 5 out of 8 markers, though we discussed in his video a couple passes or excuses for some of his misses that makes him more of a 6 to 7 kind of player, just sitting there at 5 markers. So with those in mind, Spiller currently comes in at 3 out of 8 markers hit, which I know doesn't sound great, but let's dive into that, because currently Spiller hits on weight at 217 pounds. He hits on early production, which I'm looking for 1,000 total yards in a player's 1st or 2nd season, which Spiller actually hit in both of those years. And then finally, best reception season over 25 receptions. He hit twice in 2019 and 2021, and he probably would have done it in 2020 as well, if not for the shortened season, missing a couple games. So those are the 3 markers that he currently hits on right now. However, like Drake London, Spiller also didn't run the 40 at the combine due to an abdominal injury, so he wants to run that first at his pro day. So I am missing that data for 2 more markers. So assuming that he runs under a 4.56 at his pro day, he would then also hit on my speed and speed score markers at his current weight, which would bring him to 5 out of 8 markers hit, which on paper is already ahead of Kenneth Walker. And then assuming that he is a 2nd round pick, as many people predict, or a 1st round pick, as unlikely as I think that is, but even if he is a 1st round pick as well, he will hit that marker too and finish as a 6 out of 8 marker running back, which will most likely be 2nd or tied for 2nd in this class. And that is much, much better than where he is right now at 3 out of 8 markers. So the 2 markers he is actually missing on are career yards per carry, which was 5.5, and I'm looking for 6, so not much really wiggle room there in terms of half a yard on almost 550 career carries, so he misses on that. The other is BMI, which I'm looking for 30, but Spiller is actually coming in at 29.43 at 6 foot, 217 pounds, which is ultra close to being a hit. And in fact, if he was literally either an inch shorter or 4 pounds heavier, he would hit this marker. That's how close he is. Like, he literally could have just scarfed down some McDonald's before he hopped on the scale at the combine, and he would have hit this marker and potentially have been the second 7 out of 8 marker running back in this class, right next to Breece Hall. So now that you see where Spiller ranks using my markers, which would actually be the RB2 in this class ahead of Kenneth Walker, you might be asking yourself, why do you have Walker ranked as your RB2 and Spiller ranked as your RB3? And I think that's a very good question, and one that I don't necessarily have like the greatest of answers for, but essentially it comes down to Isaiah Spiller's consistently good production versus Walker's elite jump in production going from Wake Forest to Michigan State. Spiller came into A&M as the guy, and then he left as the guy, but he didn't really statistically improve. And I know that I showed that his 13-game pace in 2020 was a big jump from 2019, but then he regressed back down in 2021 because an arguably better athlete and player was behind him that also needed touches. And that's kind of my fear for Spiller, is that in the NFL, he's just relegated to a committee role, because while he is very good at nearly everything that you're asked to do as a running back, he's not elite at anything. He reminds me of like guys like Miles Sanders or Clyde Edwards-Helaire in terms of typecasting how the NFL might actually use Isaiah Spiller, which is good for an NFL team, but it's not necessarily great for fantasy football. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was a top 10 fantasy running back at some point in his career, but I also wouldn't be shocked if he just never had a top 12 performance ever. I mean, he could be David Montgomery, which I think is the best case scenario for Isaiah Spiller, or he could be Kareem Hunt on the Browns right now as a more pass-catching 1B on a team with a bruising 1A. And that is very different than my viewpoint of Kenneth Walker, who I think could also be David Montgomery or Antonio Gibson, J.K. Dobbins, one of those types of guys. But I also think his ultimate ceiling could be Dalvin Cook or Joe Mixon. And that's why I think Walker is a better running back talent-wise than Isaiah Spiller, which leads to me having Walker as my RB2 and Spiller as my RB3 in this class. So then finally, we must talk landing spots, because right now Grinding the Mocks has Spiller as the third running back off the board, going at 66 overall, which is actually kind of scary because that's a fringe second rounder. And if he does fall to the third round, then he's not going to hit on that marker, A, and then B, the NFL is telling us something that we should actually listen to in terms of how they are valuing Isaiah Spiller in this class. But for the purpose of this video, we're just going to assume that he is a mid to late second round pick, because that's going to mean that he hits on that marker. And it also potentially means that he is in a better situation or on a better team than he would be if he were to fall and go in the early third. So the first place that I would love to see Isaiah Spiller is on the Seattle Seahawks. And I know I said mid to late second, but Seattle does have two picks back to back at 40 and 41, to where they could grab their guy if they wanted Isaiah Spiller, or possibly invite a trade back and draft Spiller a little bit later in the round. However, regardless, if Seattle were to take Spiller, that in my opinion would be a fantastic landing spot for opportunity, where he could be used as a true 3-down workhorse on that team. Rashad Penny to date hasn't been super trustworthy his entire career and is only on a 1-year deal now for 2022, so he could go somewhere else next year. Chris Carson's contract is super team friendly as well, and he could still even possibly be cut this summer if they wanted to. So this to me would be very similar to the Denver Broncos situation last year, where you had the veteran as the lead guy and the rookie kind of waiting in the wings. So while you will probably have to wait for Penny to sign elsewhere, like I said, next year, that backfield would then be all Isaiah Spiller, and that's a really good backfield and a really good fantasy asset that I want to have on my team. Next up on the list for me is the Buffalo Bills in that late second round area at 56 overall. And they tried and failed to replace Devin Singletary by drafting Zach Moss a couple years ago, but this time Spiller is actually an upgrade to Devin Singletary, and this is an offense that a running back could do well in based on how we saw Devin Singletary perform to end the year last year. In fact, his 17-game pace from his final 7 games in 2021 would have been 255 carries for 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns, while also getting an additional 45 targets, which is amazing volume, and that would actually vault Isaiah Spiller to potentially being a fantasy RB1. So I would really like to see him in the Buffalo backfield and get the keys to that backfield as their true workhorse, or at least what we saw kind of Devin Singletary doing at the end of last year. And there are a couple other teams that could use Spiller as well, but these would all bring about my fear of him being utilized as a committee back in the NFL. I mean, these are teams like the New Orleans Saints, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Arizona Cardinals are all places that he could go to and see fantasy relevant volume, but that might be to the tune of like 150 touches, which is a streamable flex option for fantasy, but it's nothing great, and it's not the ceiling that we want from our RB3 in this class. He was also often mocked to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the end of the second round, but that got killed kind of by Leonard Fournette returning on a 3-year deal as well. And then there's always those trusty Atlanta Falcons who could use basically anybody on offense, and they have potentially 2 shots at him in that early and second round range at 43rd and 58th overall. So Spiller definitely feels like he is the most landing spot dependent of the top 3 running backs that we've discussed so far. So I will be very intrigued to see not only where he goes into what team, but also when, because if he does fall to that 3rd round, like some mocks have him, we kind of need to reevaluate how we are valuing Isaiah Spiller in this class. So that is my breakdown of my 1.05 right now, Isaiah Spiller. So please make sure that you hit that like button to let me know that you love Isaiah Spiller, and let me know in the comments if he is your RB1 or RB2 ahead of Kenneth Walker or Breece Hall. And be sure to hit that subscribe button if you are not yet subscribed to get more content from the DLF YouTube channel as we continue on through rookie draft season. So with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch y'all later.